And welcome back to the program, everyone. Now, it was James Freeman Clark who said a politician thinks of the next election, but a statesman thinks of the next generation. Perhaps Clark's submission can be likened to the unfolding ethos of the political scene in today's Nigeria. The gale of defections currently stirring the opposition political parties in the face may not come to an end soon, as more opposition figures are defecting in their numbers to the ruling All Progressives Congress, that's the APC, ahead of the 2027 general election. But President Tinubu has defended the gale of defections to the APC, emphasizing that Nigeria's constitutional right to freedom of movement and association allow citizens to join any political party of their choice. He also said he's expecting more members of opposition political parties to join the APC before the 2027 general election. Now, tonight, to help us understand the politics, that's the political metrics, I'm now being joined by Professor Tukur Muhammad Baba. He's a former Dean, Faculty of Management and Social Sciences, Federal University, Benin Kebbi. He joins me virtually. Prof, good evening. Welcome to Politics Tonight.
A very good evening to you, and thank you for having me.
So, defection is basically not new. It's part of our political landscape, and I'm sure the Nigerians are used to it by now. But just the sheer scale of this particular wave of defection, people are moving in their numbers. What's your assessment of the situation, and what do you make of it?
Like you said, it's nothing new. It's been there since our independence. There have been defections and so on. Now, of course, throughout the current civilian regime, starting from 1999, there have been a lot of defections and a lot of alliances and realliances. But like you said, the most significant these days is the gale of defections. It seems to be something that has become questionable, as if somebody is going to close the door completely on defections. That is to say that you draw a line beyond which people will not cross carpets and join other parties. Now, it has a lot of implications. First of all, one, it is disappointing. It is disappointing in the sense that it will not, lack of serious opposition will not allow us to develop our democracy as much as it should. Opposition, an integral part of robust democracy. And of course, we are a developing nation. We will start from the beginning. Of course, it will not be perfect. So if this kind of things continue, then we're not going to get it right. A strong opposition at any point is very critical for the functioning of government, because then it does not allow us to slide into dictatorship. That's one. Number two, it contributes to the emergence of robust policy processes, so that with criticisms and opposition, the government is going to get it right on politics and so on. There are so many things that if you have no opposition, you don't get it right. Conflict in general, and in this case, political conflict, not even call it conflict, let's call it opposition, is very, very critical to pointing out some of the issues that ordinarily will be ignored. That's one. The other thing about the current one is there seems to be a lot of desperation on part of the ruling party to rob everybody that is of importance into its fold. To me, that is absolutely unnecessary. That is one. Number two, it shows desperation. Number three, it also reveals some latent fear of facing the electorate. If, of course, you are not sure of your politics, your popularity, and so on, what you want to do is to get as many people as you can join you, so that the opposition will not be there. As the chairman of the party in government recently says, it's better that there is only one party. Again, to me, that is taking Africa back 20, 30 years ago, when that was the vote, that there should be only one party and so on. It has worked for some countries, but in Africa, it has not worked. Now, for this regime in particular, the attempt to rob everybody in, anybody of substance, shows that the regime itself, in my opinion, is not sure of itself. It's not sure that its policies are robust enough to attract voters to cast their vote for you. So what to do
but
is
Prof,
to close off
sorry to butt
so
in,
that the voter is not confronted with options. There's just
Prof, if I may quickly come in here, because you have said that it shows that for this regime, they are not confident, of their policies. But let's examine some of the reasons that these politicians are giving for defecting. One of them is alignment and then admiration for the president. That's what some of the governors, the governor rather, the lawmakers and former governors who have defected have said, that they admire the leadership style of the president, and perhaps they want to support him, join the party to support him, to move the country forward. All right, I understand that we now have network challenges with Prof. We'll just take a break, reconnect with him. All right, we have Prof back. Prof, I don't know if you got my last question.
Your last question, sorry, I beg your pardon, if you can come again.
All right, we had network challenges. You were saying that the reason that the governors, so you were speaking of the ruling party, that the attempt, or as it were, to get everybody into its fold shows that they are not confident of their policies. And I was saying that, but on the contrary, when you listen to those or the defectors, one of the reasons they give for their defecting is admiration for the president, the leadership style of the president. And so they want to align with him to help move the country forward, which is sort of contrary to what you just said. I was asking you to react to that.
Yes, I want to say that is not reasoning. What they are giving a rationalization. When you have an unpopular policy and you want to stick to it, you want to sell it, you rationalize. It's not that you give reason. Reason is something good, something sound, something that has a basis. With so many things against some of the major policies, some of the, you can call signature policies of this regime, it's hard to believe some of those they can piece. And in fact, you would see there is a lot of cynicism in the country beyond the cameras, beyond what these people say and so on. So I will not call it reasoning, I will call it rationalization. You just want people to believe what you have done. And the more you sell the false narrative, the more you believe yourself. And it is said that when you tell lies too many times, it becomes a new normal, becomes the truth. So when we are talking of reasoning, let's leave that. It is rationalization. That in itself is not illegal. It's as good as it is, but let's not be deceived.
All right, let's look at the second reason, which is the leadership crisis within their parties. And again, when you look at the Labour Party and the PDP, they seem to be having internal crisis, which they have not been able to resolve. Some of them started even before the general election, some of them just after the general election. And they have said, look, we cannot continue in a situation where the internal crisis is not being resolved. So we're moving to a party that looks, maybe on the outside, a bit more stable than every other party.
Thank you. You said on the outside. I will go with that. It looks on the outside. But there is certainly some degree of coercion, some degree of intimidation, some degree of, persuasion in the tactics used by the ruling party. That is on the one hand. On the other hand, leadership crisis has always been, as you have said, a part of our system. But of course, where there is a little tendency for cult personality politics in the current dispensation, everyone is single. I beg, if you'll excuse me, is on the mandate we stand. That is one. On the other hand, also is the nature of our politics. The winner takes all. And then that is on the one hand. On the other hand, politics is not seen as service in our country. It is service to self. So when individuals are there and not for service or such, of course, they would do anything to stay there. And then, of course, political offices in Nigeria are over-pampered. They are overcompensated. The humongous resources that we throw at political office holders makes people want to stay there forever. I mean, currently there are people on the political scene jumping up and down that were in government when I was an undergraduate. That was over 45 years ago. and they're still on the scene. You explained that because part of the strong explanation of this is that public office is very, very comfortable, and people get addicted to it. And there are so many people that cannot live without the patronage, without those overcompensation, those protocols we subject public offices to. So it's not surprising that people will be with the quote-unquote winner, where in other words, people know where their bread is buttered. I read an interview with a serving senator who said they collect about 14 million naira per month, but that is not enough. That tells you why they don't want to go. And when we're living in a country where a lot of people do not get 14,000 naira a month of their own idle money versus 14 million naira. And the distinguished senator is saying even that does not compensate them adequately. So you can see why I said public office is over-pampered, over-compensated in Nigeria. The protocol is simply too lucrative to give up. So that is part of the problem.
All right, Prof, you've made a lot of very interesting points that I would like us to unpack, but we'll have to go on a break now. When we return, we're going to look at some of those points one after the other. Stay with us, everyone. You're watching Politics Tonight. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Politics Tonight. Was talking about, again, the gale of defections in the country as many more lawmakers, we've seen governors and former governor and former governors also defecting. Was speaking with Professor Mohammed Baba. He is the former Dean of Social and Management Studies in Beni Kebbi. Thank you so much for staying with us. So, Prof, just before we went on that break, you were talking about, the role of the governing or ruling party in also getting some of, you said they are coercing some of these politicians into their party, and then you also said it's reflective of the kind of politics we play when the winner takes it all, and then that political offices are a bit too, we make it, they're pampered, and so people aspire to those offices. But I also wanted to ask you, can we absolve the political parties themselves, as the opposition parties, of any blame? When, for example, if anybody runs, if a primary is conducted today in any of those opposition political parties, and a candidate emerges, you're likely going to have the court upturn one of those candidates, because sometimes the primaries are run by factions, and no one knows the faction that is the chairman or secretary who is the actual secretary until after elections, and then you are told you did not win the election because the primaries that brought you in, it's not legal. And so that's why some of these people also defect. Can that also be a credible reason?
Certainly, it's a reason. Whether it's, again, I go back to my point, it's a credible rationalization, I would say. But you see, one of the most interesting things about the defection, as soon as it happens, people are promised automatic ticket. For God's sake, we elect people for periods of 4 years at the federal level. There is nothing constitutional about an automatic ticket. So when people are given automatic tickets because they have defected to the ruling family, is that not inducement? And why do they want to go back? Because, like I said, it's very lucrative. The other thing also behind these defections is that we are not practicing politics of ideology. The truth of the matter is, in terms of ideas, in terms of ideology, in terms of aspiration to office, nearly all the political actors belong to the same political reasoning and ideology. That is why you find that most of the major politicians, actually, when you follow the trajectory of their political history, they go from one party to another, back to the party, out again, like a revolving door. And the major reason for that is there is no ideology. So wherever I find myself, it's okay. So, I mean, you get used to the familiar, and where there is no ideology, you can fit anywhere. Like I said, you can sit on the fence, and so you can go either way, left or right, there is no difference. And where you don't have differences in political opinion, differences in ideology, it allows people to go wherever they want to go. It becomes a marketplace. Whatever attracts me, when I come, I buy it, consume it, go back for it, and so on, because there is no ideology. There are no principles that people can hang on to, except the fact that the most central is that I want to occupy that office. It's I, me, and myself. That is the only ideology. So, you know, it doesn't bring variety of political ideas. You go through it. The 2023 elections, if you go through all the major presidential candidates, you can say there is no difference in their ideology. Everyone promised some of the most devastating policies we have. All the major political gladiators said they will remove fuel subsidy, they will end subsidy, and so on. So you can say, why is this so? Because there is no difference between the PDP, the APC, the Labour Party. They are all ruled by the same ideology of neoliberalism. That is to say, whatever the World Bank and the IMF promise is what they will do. So you find a politician in one party this hour and another, nothing changes. The ideology doesn't change. The ruling principles are the same. And this principle is laissez-faire. I, me, and myself. And that's all. So, but yeah, I agree with you. There are all kinds of scenarios you can bring and justify movement from one party to another. Sometimes you can even say that some of the crises in some of the parties are induced by internal members or induced by the opposition party, whether it's the ruling party or the non-ruling party, so as to ensure that they harvest. It's like a fisherman going to muddy the waters and taking everything else for themselves.
So, Prof, when it comes to election, you have talked about inducing some of those people with automatic tickets. Running on the platform of the ruling party, does that guarantee you automatic election victory? Because first of all, if you're a governor, you know that your election is not on the same day with the president, and so you cannot even bank on his win. It's a different Saturday, and so you are faced with your people at that time who will decide whether you have led them well or not.
Ideally, the ultimate decider of the election win should be the voter. Ideally. Now, but what kind of voting public do we have? What kind of voting system do we have? Look at the recent controversy about compulsory voting. And people are saying that, look, you don't have to force people to vote. What sells you is your policies, the impact on the people. Unfortunately, a lot of people are saying we don't vote because our vote do not count. We don't see politicians until after 3.5 years. If we don't take the little they are giving us, we get nothing. So it's the nature of our politics itself. Does the vote count? Does the process of voting, transmitting and announcing results, does it have credibility? Does it have believability? And so on. So it's a whole cocktail of problems. It's a jollof rice of all kinds of problems that relate to the nature of our underdevelopment. The voter is not as educated, or rather is not as enlightened as they should be about how sacred their vote is. Politicians realize that, so they manipulate that aspect, because it then goes back that there are a lot of problems. And that, so what to do is to exploit the situation. Exploiting the situation means confusing the people more. Let me give you an example. We are just halfway through a 4-year term, just halfway through. Almost from the very first day of the 4-year term.
Prof, it looks like we've lost network with you again, making very critical points there.
The idea is to take your mind off the ball for the voter. Yeah, the idea is to take the voter's mind away from current performance to future hopes and so on. Otherwise, halfway through the term, the tenure, you're already campaigning. It doesn't make much sense. Except
but
that,
Prof,
you know,
if I may
that is
come
the
in
kind
here,
of politics
is it because you've made 2 points, one on the side of the citizens, and we're going to get there very soon. But really, when you look, this is perhaps the first time where you're right. Politicking started the very day this president was announced winner of the election. But when you also look at it critically, it wasn't really by the APC, it was by the opposition parties, who at that moment were already talking about alignment and realignment. They were already even talking about coalition at that time. A lot of things were already playing out as though they were already planning for 2027. And one wonders, what is so important about 2027 and what's at stake that, you know, the politicking has to start from the very first moment, or from the moment that the president was announced winner?
A famous sociologist has expounded a theory of the circulation of the elites. What he said was, in politics, what we have is the same factions of the same elite circulating themselves in power. Obviously, if I were into active politics, I would start campaigning. The moment I lose an election by fair or foul means, I would start planning. So, but like I said, don't be deceived by the motions you see. All these motions, like I said, are without ideology, concrete ideology that will show difference between one party and another. Whether it's if you check the developed democracies, this is exactly what happened. You start planning for the next election from day one. So you start chipping in, you start drawing attention to the failures of the current party in government. But our own, you do it there. They do it on the part on the basis of principles, on the basis of ideology. Our own is, like I said, we are doing it on the basis of personal interest foremost. And then, of course, we are dealing with an unenlightened electorate that is yet to appreciate the power of its votes, which means the vote is a toss-up. Anybody with the right ingredients will come and buy the votes. Or you go back. You know that the electoral process itself has a lot of shortcomings. The way people get to power and so on and so forth, it's not perfect. So it can be manipulated. Under these circumstances, what do you expect?
And that's the crux of the matter. It's really about citizens, because if politicians were sure and know for a fact that citizens were going to hold them accountable, this defection will not matter whether you are, you know, on the platform of the ruling or the opposition party. If it really falls back to the citizen. And I'm wondering what will lead to that reawakening, where citizens can become more active, not just for criticism, but really for participation.
Enlightenment, enlightenment, enlightenment. That's one. Two, there has to be the evolution of credibility and believability in the electoral system itself. The process of voting, people have to be convinced that is within their expectations, that if they vote, it will count. So you can see that, for example, the electoral body, INEC, has a responsibility for voter education. How much voter education do we see? Very, very little, because our attention is elsewhere. You know, what of other civic organizations? How much voter education is being done? Very little. To an extent, in some parts of the country, yes. But in most part of this country, voter education, which should be continuous, mobilization by non-governmental organizations and interest groups should also be something that is sustained, so that people are educated, so that we point out some of the strengths and weaknesses of policies being put in place by people in power. This is missing. And of course, elites like you and I, most of the time we sit back and we help with the unenlightenment. Oh, we don't believe them, so we don't go there. The other thing is also that the political process is said that people who are credible, people who have integrity, people who can deliver are discouraged from participation in politics because of the monetization of the whole thing itself. So that people who would otherwise have something to give are discouraged, because when they go to the electorate themselves, a lot of the times the electors, what have you got? What have you done for yourself? You know, Ali Mazrui, the late professor of political science, has said something about African political systems way back, I think, in 1967. He published an influential article on the monarchical tendency of African political systems and political practices, where he argued that most of our politicians, when they get to office, they see themselves as monarchs, as emperors, as people not to be challenged. And in fact, the development of the one-party system can be traced to that kind of thinking. And part of the monarchical tendency is that we over-pamper politicians. So the ordinary citizen is immediately frightened. And so they don't see the politician as a member of the committee, they see them as an overlord. Because, again, this also has roots in the legacy left by colonialism. When we build houses, we build government reservation areas. We tend to move away from the people of which we are a part. In some other countries, we will see that the same politicians live in the same areas and so on and so forth. This is not. Like, I will admit that there is no one single explanation for all this. Rather, it's a cocktail of problems that are interacting singly and in combination that is giving us the less than the ideal democratic system that we have. It's one of those things that is stopping us from developing a robust democratic system of government. The press is there. We in the academia, we are there. And so, because some of what we see politicians practicing, disappointingly, is happening in the universities, in tertiary institutions.
Absolutely.
Where colleagues
it is a systemic problem.
And we use all kinds of things.
So, Prof,
it's a systemic problem, I agree.
You took
but
us
the
back
sad thing is we are not doing much. We are not doing much to correct
and that's what I want to talk to you about,
problems.
Because you sort of brought up that conversation on the chicken and the egg, which comes first. You talked about citizens not participating because of the perceived lack of credibility of the process. And I also wanted to ask you, which should come first? Is it the fact that when the process is credible, citizens believe that the process is credible, then participate, or that when citizens participate, then we'll have a credible process?
Personally, I would like to see a lot of massive public enlightenment on citizens and their rights with regards to the political process. One, with regards to how they can determine, with regards to how they will express their dissatisfaction by voting with their feet. Or rather, when they see something good that people are serving the general good, they vote for them. That's what I would like to see. So that we need to spend a lot more resources on enlightenment. That will be a beginning. It will not be sufficient. The next one is to hold our elected officers, elected officials accountable. That at some period, they must go back to the electorate to justify their positions. And this will be an electorate that is continuously enlightened as to what are their legitimate expectations of those that have voted or those that found themselves in political office. So the education for me is the number one. Number two, it has to be accompanied by deliberate tinkering of the political process so that it achieves credibility, it achieves believability, and is not subject to the sometimes open manipulation that we see. And of course, the big one, the judiciary, which has been a problem in Nigeria. I mean, we have had the judiciary determining electoral success or otherwise. This, I think, we need reforms in that area too. But again, it all goes back, in my opinion, to education. There are three factors. Education, the second one is education, the third one is education. If you like, you can call it enlightenment, enlightenment, enlightenment. And then, of course, holding people accountable for their actions or inactions.
So, Prof, I wanted to ask you, because a lot of people have said, look, we're sort of slipping into a one-party state. Some have said it's not possible. that the internal crisis we see in these parties today, well, will be resolved in due time. But what we see now, is this like the last vestiges of opposition in Nigeria? Or do you think that perhaps the opposition has the ability to recapture power?
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. When you talk of opposition, you want to find out opposition on the basis of what? Is it on the basis of politicking to get to a public office? Or is opposition on the basis of conviction, born out of ideology and principles? You see, what is happening right now is all kinds of people of the same thing are competing for office. And of course, like we say in the Hausa language, you get water from the well using your own the water in your body. If you are weak and famished, you cannot get water from the well. You are weak and famished if you don't have water. So, you know, what we have right now is something that can be said is the same group of people fighting to replace each other in public offices. But that isn't much different. I mean, it's very sad. It's very sad, in my opinion, that today there are many people who will tell you that they fared better in terms of infrastructure, in terms of school, under the military than they do under the civilian. I have seen analysis say, oh, the military did this, the military did this, the military did this. Civilians have not been able to do it. What has become common is a humongous amount of money flying left, right, and center. Remember, one of our top public officials said not long ago, what money cannot buy in Nigeria, more money will buy. Isn't it that a very sad statement of our situation?
I also wanted to ask you, Prof, I also want, I mean, it's food for thought. I could listen to you all day. But I also wanted to ask you, should there then be a constitutional issue? Should there be a provision to deal with the legality of defection?
That is, you see, another problem that we have is that we are not building institutions. The institutions are very weak. Law enforcement that should see the credibility of an election is compromised. Judiciary is alleged to be compromised. Electoral officials are alleged. You see the difference with India. India, right from the word go, insisted on building institutions, insisted on building the process as to have credibility. India has over 900 million voters. They are able to vote not in one day. In fact, they have staggered elections, staggered not only in terms in time, staggered in locations, geographical locations, and they do it without any problem. India is like a developing country. It's a developing country like us. It is a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society, but the whole idea of quote unquote military coup is something that is unheard of in India. We have never had it. You see, the civil service in India is very independent, robustly so. The judiciary in India is independent, is robustly so. They have built institutions and processes, and there is no reason why we cannot do that. In fact, the tragedy about our situation is we are in a position to teach Africa a lot, but we are not taking that. In fact, I listened to the officials of the electoral body when Ghana finished its recent election very well. They were saying, yeah, they came to learn from us. And I laughed. I said, the student is obviously doing better than the teacher, which is sad. So we need to build institutions. We need to empower these institutions so they focus on their goals and their objectives and their constitutional mandate, rather than being roped in to be part of the executive itself. That's what we don't have. The parliament, we started in 1999 with the different assemblies exercising their independence. Gradually, we are going down. It seems that the legislature itself is not willing to exercise its due independence. This is even at the federal level. It's worse. at the state level, where you can say that the state assemblies in most places, except in the few 3 or 4 states where we have crisis, the legislature is actually an extension of the government, of the governor's kitchen cabinet. Once we have that, we are not developing the institutions, we are not developing the processes, and each of us is laid back and we are accepting things as they are, not as they should be.
For those, I want to use your word rationalize. For those who rationalize and say, look, this is perhaps all that we have to deal with because our democracy is a nascent one, perhaps maybe in a few years, in a few decades, we will outgrow all of this to having stronger institutions and having political parties with ideology, and that we cannot continue to compare ourselves with the US and the UK, who have decades and centuries of democracy.
You see, when you are building a normal building, a house, an office block, and so on, what do you start with? The most fundamental is to have a plan. This plan has to go with certain regulations and so on. And it has to start from a foundation. The foundation has to be solid, no compromise. Okay? Otherwise, there is no room for saying, well, the foundation is not straightforward here. The mixing is not good enough, but let's build it. Maybe later we can correct it. So my grouse is that we are not doing anything to lay the basic foundations of democratic governance. And so long as we allow this thing to continue, then the abnormal will not become normal. And the cumulative effect is we will never have a structure that is solid on ground that will stand the test of time. So we have to begin from the beginning. That is to say, those systems, those institutions have to be robust enough to do their duties, and that's all. But so long as we continue to accept half measures, we continue to accept compromises, we continue to look the other way around, then we'll never get it right, I'm afraid.
And do you also agree with the school of thought that Africa should also define the kind of democracy that it wants to practice, that we cannot, because of our political culture, we cannot have the US kind of liberal democracy or the UK's kind of conservative democracy, as has to be defined just the way Russia or China has defined their kind of democracy, if we call it democracy at all?
Oh, yes. You see, democracy is not a one-gown-fits-all. It is developed in relation to the society, its history, its economic institutions, and so on and so forth. What goes for democracy in one society is not necessarily the same. There is certainly a lot for Africa to fashion out its own system of governance that will allow for citizens' rights, that will allow for accountability, that will deal with corruption. But you see, I have always said that our problem is not constitutions. Our problem is not type of system. Our problem is those who are in politics obeying the rules and regulations. What we have in most part of African countries are those people who seek to assume power by democratic means. As soon as they do, they turn back to undermine those democratic processes that brought them to power. Then what do you have? Compromises here and there, people doing, and we will just keep building. It is not the system, it's the people who operate the system. If they want to allow it to work, it will work. It's, let me give you an example. We keep saying we want for security, we want devolution of the powers of the police. I told someone that the same arguments that were used to have a federal police are now being used to dismantle the federal police. What does it tell me? It is not the rules and regulations. It is those who operate the rules and regulations that make them useless, that make them unable to work. If we can get people to accept that there is a process, there is due process, and there should be no compromises, whoever is involved, then we'll build it. But so long as we keep making excuses for our rulers, we keep making excuses for each other, we keep running away from the principles of the system, then I'm afraid we'll never get it right.
Prof, like I said, we could listen to you all day. Thank you so much for your analysis and brilliant thoughts on this issue tonight. Professor Tukur Muhammad Baba, former Dean, Faculty of Management and Social Sciences, Federal University, Benin Kebbi. Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you so very much for having me.
All right, that marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But before we go, let's tell you that the views and reactions of our resource person is his and have no connection with TVC News. Meanwhile, you can watch the repeat broadcast of this episode at midnight. You can also get in touch with us on our social media handles. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and on X at TVC News NG. On YouTube, we're live at TVC News Nigeria. Thanks for watching. I am Precious Amayu.